Hi, this is Ashish from developerhut.net and welcome to InHut Development Series. So in today's tutorial, we will be going to create a very simple CRUD application using Spring Boot. So these are the prerequisite for this tutorial. So you will require a good understanding of Java and Spring Boot technologies. We will also be going to use the MySQL from the database point of view. We are not going to use a lot of database related stuff, but the basic commands we will be going to cover. Then we will also be using the servlet and JSP part a little bit, so you will require a basic understanding of a JSP, of course. And last but not the least, the HTML and CSS along with the Bootstrap. So the Bootstrap section is additionally I am going to cover, because Bootstrap is a very good to provide a good level of UI experience. So anyway, I will be covering all these sessions throughout this video. Now if you are planning to finish this complete tutorial in one go, that's always the best way to do this tutorial. So if you are doing this tutorial in a step by step, then I will recommend all of you to bookmark this URL and you can resume back later. The best way to follow this tutorial is to code along with me so that you can understand all the concept while doing the development. So let's look at the high level functional requirement for this application. So we will be going to create a very simple entity which is user in our application, which has the four attributes. The first is the ID, which is automatically generated by the application. Then the login ID for this particular user, which can be email we can say. Then name of the particular user and the status of the particular user. Maybe it can be active or inactive. Then functional requirement side, our application should able to create the new user. It should also able to view information of all the users. It should also able to update that particular user, and also it should be able to delete that particular user. Now let's see a very simple demo of this Spring CRUD application. Now this is the view user screen where we are showing all the users information on this page, and all this data is basically coming from the database, right? So here we are providing the additional functionality to edit as well as delete the user. Now we also have a functionality to create the user. So if you click on the create user, our application will route it to create user page. Now here we can create the user. So let's say I will say Harry @gmail.com, right, and I will give the name Harry and I will mark Harry as active, right? So now if you click on a save, you will get a message that the user is saved with particular ID, whatever the auto generated ID taken by the application. And if you click on a view all, you can see our newly added user is created, right? Now let's say if I wanted to edit a particular user, let's say I want to edit a mic, right? So when I click on a edit button, all the details related to this mic user is fetched from the database and added on a form, and here we can update the let's say I will update the status of this user mic, which is from active to inactive. And when I say update, I will get the message that user is updated successfully. And if we go back to our view users and if we see the mic is now as inactive, right? Then last is of course to delete the user. Let's say if I want to delete the William, right? So if I click on delete, so my users get deleted from the database. Now here whatever the UI currently you are looking at, is this UI is basically coming from the Bootstrap section, right? So I have applied the Bootstrap libraries, Bootstrap styles and CSS to this particular pages, all these pages, and Bootstrap will basically update the all the UI related part, right? So whatever the buttons currently you are looking at, the link, the table, right, the hover, the animation which is right now is appearing on your screen. So basically this is the Bootstrap, right? So all the message and everything is definitely a Bootstrap. So basically we will be first going to create the complete application without a Bootstrap with a very normal HTML forms, and once we finish with it we will apply the Bootstrap on this all the created HTML pages. You can check the directly jump to the Bootstrap section. You can see the chapters is already available on this video, and you can directly go to the applying Bootstrap chapter and you can check how I added the Bootstrap and all the related information at there. So let's see a very high level architecture of our CRUD application. So our CRUD application is basically divided into three different parts. So first is the front end part, where user will interact from the front end. Then we have a backend part which will handle all the business related operation, and third is the database part, where we will be storing all the data which is coming from a front end. Then our front end part basically consists of the JSP and HTML. It's a combination of JSP and HTML and Bootstrap. So we'll be creating a lot of JSPs for this along with the HTML tags. Then backend, we will be going to create a very simple Spring application which will be handling all business related operation, like getting the request from the UI and perform certain business operation and send it back to the UI, data back to the UI. And last is the database, of course, which we are going to use a MySQL. So basically whenever request come from your front end, it will be processed by the Spring Boot application, and Spring Boot application will connect to the database. If required, it will get the data back, and once it gets the data back, it will send it back to the UI. So this is a very high level architecture of this application. Now let's look at the application layer and development plan before we proceed ahead with the application development. So our Spring CRUD application contain 4 basic layers. So these 4 layers are the controller layer, the service layer, the repository or DAO layer, and last is the model layer. So in any web application or industry-wide any web application you see, all those application contains these 4 levels or 4 layers. So basically now let's see how this layers used in different way. So the first layer is the controller layer. So this layer defines the basic API that your application is exposing to user, right? Controller is basically controls the way of how user interact with the application, and they defines the API. This controller is responsible for routing the actual response, whether application should send the response in JSON format or in XML format, or maybe it map that particular format with the JSP and then send it back. So this kind of operation is performed by the controller layer. Then next is the service layer. So this basic service layer is used to declare and define the business logics. So these business logics are very important in any kind of web application, because all the request coming from the controller first go to the service, and service layer defines what to do with that request, how to manipulate that request, and it will apply certain business logic. For example, it can apply the validation to that particular business logics, and then that particular request proceed ahead to the next layer. This service layer is also act as a mediator between controller and a repository layer, because controller cannot directly talk to the repository. So we have a separate service layer which will do all these operations. Then next is the repository or DAO layer. Now this layer defines what kind of operation is going to perform on the database, right? So it will declare all those operations like addition of user, updation of user, or maybe a deletion of user, or fetching all the details of the user from the database. So it will define all those the implementation, so that service layer can connect with the repo and do that particular operation. And last is the model layer. Now this model layer is reserved for the database mapping. So in the model layer, basically whatever the classes that we are going to create are actually mapped to the database objects. So in our application, let's say we have a user table, and this table is basically mapped to the user.java file, which contains all the mapping from particular instance variable to database table columns. So like the id of the database column is mapped to the long id of instance variable of your user.java file, right? So likewise, you can map login id, name, and status instance variable to the actual column of the database. Now these are the application layer, and here you can see I have also added the sample structure, package based structure of our application. So I have divided all the layers with a particular package structure. So for example, our controller classes will go inside the controller package, our model classes go inside the model package, and repository and service classes go with their repos and service packages, right? So now let's proceed ahead and starts with the actual application development. Now let's start with the project creation. So click on the file, new, and spring starter project. Now let's add the name. So I will say spring hyphen CRUD hyphen application, right? So spring CRUD application. The type will be of course Maven, version will be Java 8, and packaging type will be jar, and then add the group ID. So I will say com.developerhut.crud. Okay, I will just update the artifact ID to smaller case, right? So spring dot crud dot application, right? So hyphen application. I will add the description. So spring, I will say CRUD application, right? And package structure I will be add as a com.developerhut.crud. So this is the project structure as of now. So I request all of you to use the similar version of the setting so that you won't run into runtime surprises. Okay, so use the similar version, don't use the any other version as of now. Then click on the next, and now we need to select our Spring Boot version and add the dependencies. So Spring Boot version for this project will be, I'll be using the 2.5.13. okay, so you can use the similar version, then add the project dependencies. So first is we will be adding the Spring Web dependency, right? So Spring Web. Then next is the data JPA, so Spring Data JPA, right? And last is the MySQL dependencies, because we are going to use the MySQL database, right? So the Spring Web dependency is basically will require to build the web application, right? So as we are creating the web application, so Spring Web is required. So this dependencies includes all the required classes which you required to create any Spring Web application, as well as it also contains the embedded Tomcat, so that you can run the application once you whatever you have created, right? Then next is the MySQL driver dependencies, right? As you are using MySQL database, so we need to include the MySQL driver dependencies. And last but not the least is the data JPA, right? So whatever the database related operation I am going to perform using the Spring MVC, so for that we will require the Spring Data JPA dependency. Okay, so these are the configurations. Now you can click on the next and then click on the finish. So once you click on the finish, your project gets created, and your Eclipse will start downloading the required dependencies, right? So here you can see there is some issue with the project. We will be going to see it soon. So let's visit the POM first. So pom.xml, you can see the dependencies that we have added, the version 2.5.13, right, the group id which we have added, com.developerhead.crud, the artifact id which we have added, right, spring CRUD application, the name, the description, right, and we also have added the 1.8, right. Then the from the dependency size, you can see we have added the spring boot starter data jpa dependencies, right, then the spring boot starter web dependencies and your MySQL dependencies, right. Spring automatically adds the spring boot starter test dependencies for your JUnit related classes, right. So it will be there. Now here I can see there is some issue with the POM. So for this, my Maven jar plugin version is little bit of a different and older one, so I am just updating my Maven jar plugin, right, to the version 3.1.1, and once it build the project, my error is resolved, right. Alright, then now let's go to the project, and here I can see there is some issue. So you can click on a configure build path, and here you can see my GRE is not bound, so I need to update my GRE. You can encounter such kind of errors if there is any issue with your Eclipse configuration. Okay, so whatever the Spring tool suite version I'm using, so there are some issues probably with it, right. So now you can run as, you can clean the project, update the project, and your project gets updated, right. Then you can go to the Maven and click update. Okay, so this will basically compile your entire project, and your project is now ready, right. So now our entire project is ready. Now let's revisit the project structure. So the first is source main Java, right. So here your all application related Java files are available, right. So by default the Spring project will create one Java file which annotated with Spring Boot application, and if you run this, your project gets start. We will be soon going to use this file. We will run this application. Then next is the source main resources section, where we have our application.properties file which we use for the project related configurations. Then you can also add some static files if you want, the templates if you want, right. Then the Spring test Java, where you can add your JUnit related test cases, and your POM file, right. So it is already there. So now our project is ready. Now it's our time to hit to the database. Now I have created a very simple schema which is Spring CRUD, and we will be going to create our first database table where we will be storing all our data, right. So we will be going to create a table with name as a user, right. And now this user table consists of four different columns. So the first is of course the ID of the user, which is int in nature and which will be primary key, right. So it will be a primary key, of course, and what I want is I want this primary key to be auto increment, right. Then next is the login ID. So I will be going to create the login ID, which is basically we can say it can be email ID, right. Then next is the name, where we can add the username, and last is the status, right. So status is basically the user status, like active or inactive. So now let's go ahead and create the simple table. So I will say create table user, right, and I will say ID. Now ID is of type int, right. So I will say int, and what I want is I want this to be primary key. So primary key, and I also want this to be auto incremented, right. So I will say auto increment. So increment, right. So auto increment. Now ID is ready. Now let's say next one. So next is the login ID. So login ID, and I will say varchar of 30, right. so varchar of 30. Then next is very simple name, so where a name is of course a varchar, right? So varchar again I will say 30, and last is the status, right? So status, and it is varchar of I will say 10. Okay, so now our table query is ready. Now let's select and execute the query, and yeah, so you can see our query is executed, and if you refresh your schema you can see the table is created, right? And if you select, so select star from user, right? Select and execute again, so our table is created, right? So now it's time to add some data using your our program or our application, right? So now our database table is ready. Now let's go ahead and start creating the classes, right? So as I explained earlier, we saw the lot of layers, application layers, right? The controller layer, the service layer, the repository layer or die layer, and lastly the model layer, right? So we will be starting with the model layer first. So our model layer is basically reserved for the database mapping. So your models in your Spring application is directly mapped to the database table. Okay, so let's go ahead and create the first model class. So I will close everything, and so I will first create a separate package, right? So I will say com.developerhead.crud.model, right? So I'll be keeping all my model classes inside the model package, right? And here I will go ahead and create a class with user, with name as a user, right? I will say finish. So my user class is ready. Now let's create the instance variable. So I will say private, I will say int, I will say id, right? So first is id, then I will say private, then string, and I will say login id, right? So login id, then next is private and string and name, right? Then private string status, right? So these are the four instance variable. So what I will do here is, instead of a primitive I will use the wrapper class, right? So I will say integer, right? So integer, right? So now what are the things that you need to do to map this particular Java class to your actual table, right? So first thing that you need to do is you need to mark this class or annotate this class with the @entity annotation, right? So I will say @entity, right? So entity, it will take some time, right? So entity now, so I will mark this as an entity first, right? Then the next is @table annotation, right? So I will say @table, right, which is from java x dot persistence, and I will pass a name, right? So name is equal to, I will pass the table name which is user, right? So this is done. The next is id is basically a primary key, right? So I will mark the id as @id annotation, right? So I will say id, and which is from java x dot persistence. Then next is the login id. So here you need to mark this with @column. So I will say @column, right? So java x dot persistence, and here you can see the name is there, right? So name, and you can pass the column name, so it is login id, right? So I will say save. Then next is @column is name is equal to, right? So name, and last is @column, right? Name is equal to status, right? So I will say status, right? So we have marked our annotation. Now you also need to create the getter setter method for this. So I'll say alt shift s, and you can generate the getter setters for all the instance variable, right? And I will say generate, and I will also override the toString method over here, right, with all the fields, because we'll be requiring this later point of time. Okay. Now here, as I mentioned earlier, our ID is basically the auto incremented field. It would be a primary key, of course, and it will be auto incremented. So we also need to annotate the ID with a different annotation. So it will be at the rate generated value, right? So generated value, and here you need to pass the generator or strategy type is equal to, which is generated type dot, instead of auto I will use the identity. We require the identity, right? So we will be mapped our ID with the annotation generated value, and strategy type will be generation type dot identity, right? So this is our basic model class is ready now. So now let's go ahead and create the another package, another layer. So now let's create the repository layer or a DAO layer. So as I mentioned earlier, we will be using the JPA in this application, right? So in JPA, or repository layer using JPA is very easy. uh, there's a lot of very less code involved while creating the repository layer in a Spring CRUD application if you're using the JPA. Okay, so let's create the JPA classes and interfaces. So I will create a new package. I will say new package, and I will here say repos. Okay, repos stand for repository, and here I will simply create one interface, and I will name it as user repository. Okay, so user repository, right? So what you need to do if you want this user repository to act as a JPA, so for this you just need to do a very simple thing, which is you just need to extend the user repository with the JPA repository. Okay, so I will say extends, right, and here I will say JPA repository, right? So JPA repository interface takes two uh, generic types. So first is of course a type D, which is of class. So user repository is basically for the user table, right, or user DAO class, right? So here you need to pass the user, and next is the I need to import this, so I will say import, and next is the ID. So primary key, so our primary key in our case is the ID, which is of type integer, right? So we need to pass the type here, so I can say integer, right? So I hope you understood why I converted this int to integer, right? Because this JPA repository will only take the actual object type of object, not the primitives. Okay, so our user repository is ready now. So now let's proceed with the service layer. So as I explained earlier, service is basically used to write your business related logics, right? And it acts as an mediator between controller and your DAO or repos classes, right? So whatever the input that service layer received from the controller class, service layer will execute appropriate the database related operation and execute it on a repository layer, and whatever the response it got, it send it back to the controller. Okay, so let's go ahead and create the service related classes and interfaces. So first I will create a package, so I will say new, and I will say package, and I will say com.developer hut.crud.service, right? So service, and then I will create one interface, so I will say user service, right? So user service, this will be the interface that we are going to create, right? And this interface will define the all the methods that all the business related logic we will be adding over there, right? So the first method that we are going to add is the add method, right? So what I will do, I will say void add, and I will say I will pass the user, right? So I will say user, it takes some time, okay, and I will say user, right? So what this method will do, this service method will take the user, complete user as an input from the controller, and it will add, execute the, you know, um, database add methods, right? Or adding the this particular user using the repository into the database, right? And what I will do is, instead of void, I will return the added user. Okay, so first we will only going to add, and later point of time we will add other methods for update, read and delete operation. So now we have a user service, right? Now let's create his implementation class. So I will go ahead and I will create another package, and I will say service.impl. Okay, so all my implementation will go in service.impl, right? So I will go here and I will say create a class, and I will say impl user service impl, and I will simply extend with my interface, right, which is user service. And once you click finish, you will get your method, right? Empty implementation of your add method, right? So the first thing that we need to do is we need to mark this user service impl class with the stereotype annotation @service, so that Spring framework knows that this particular class is act as a service. Okay, so I will say @service, right? And let's import it. So Spring framework stereotype, right? So now this class is act as a service now, and next is we need to, you know, execute the add method from the repository, right? So if you go to the repository, there are no methods as of now, right? But it extends the JPA repository. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to auto-wire this user repository inside the service, right? So I will say private, and I will say user repository, right? So user repository, and here I will say user repository, right? And I will simply auto-wire this @auto-wire, right? So auto-wire. So as we have now the user repository class, so now I use the user repository, and then we will be using the save method, right, which is from the CRUD repository, right? And I will simply pass the user, right? And what I will do, I will this save method is return the user object, right? So I will just use this user object and extract it to local variable and return that particular user object, right? So I will say a saved user, right? And I will return this saved user. Okay, so now this is our service impl, and now it's ready. So I hope you understood this. So we have created first a user service interface, right, where we have declare one method, which is add method, which takes the argument of user input as a user, and we create the implementation which implements the user service interface. We auto wire our DAO or a repository, right, and then we added the implementation and we simply call the save method, right? So here you can add your business related other logics if you want, right? So that is the is service layer is for, right? So that's it. This is the user service. So now let's proceed ahead with creation of the controller. So what is a controller? So your controller is basically a starting point of your backend application, right, where user sends a request, and it is a controller who decides what to do with that particular request and what shall be the response of that particular request, right? So we will be going to create the controller in the separate package. So let's go ahead and create a new package, and here I will say com.developer.crud.controller. So controller, right? And let's create the new controller here, and I will say a class, and I will say user controller, right? So user controller. Now to mark this class as a controller, we need to annotate this class with @controller annotation, right? So I will say controller, and I will just import it, right? So now this particular class is act as a controller because we marked this as a @controller annotation. So for now what we will do is we will create a very simple API which will only return your sample JSP page. Okay, so I will write one method. I will say public, and I will say string. So we will be returning a string, and I will say show create, right? And it doesn't take anything. Okay, and for now I will say return null as of now. Okay, now we need to convert this method to the API, right? So what I will do, we need to annotate this method with @request mapping, right? So I will say @request mapping, and I will simply say show create, right? So this will be your actual URL in the browser, right? And I will return here the name of the JSP page which I will be going to create. So I will say create user page, right? So I will we will simply return this create user page dot .jsp, right? For simplicity sake, what I will do is I will just change the mapping. I will say create user, right? So your URL will be create user, and the page name is create user page. Okay, so to differentiate between both the page and the URL, I am just taking this name like this. Okay, so you can give any name, any proper name, that whatever you want, right? So here now our controller is ready. Now we will proceed ahead with the JSP page creation and the further configuration. So now let's proceed ahead with the page creation. So to create the JSP page, we need to follow certain folder structure over here, right? So I will go to the source, right, and main, and first we need to create one folder, right? And folder name is web app, right? This folder structure is mandatory because this is how our web application works, right? So in the folder structure, again we need to create one more folder which is web-inf, right? And what I will do is I will put all my JSPs inside another folder, right? So I will say JSPs, right? And yeah, so here we will going to create our first JSP. So here I will go and I will say other, and yeah, here it is. So I will click on a JSP, and here I will say create user page dot JSP, right? And I will say click next, and I will click on a finish. Okay, so now our JSP is ready. Now let's change the title. I will say create user, right? So we will add our title or something over here. So I will say spring, I will say CRUD application, right? And this is my main title, and here I will add the h3. I will say create, right, user, right? So first we will just see whether we are able to access this page or not, right? So our page is ready. So now it's time to add our other configurations, right? So to configure the database related configuration and this JSP page configuration, we need to add certain configuration in our application.property file. So first we will add our database configuration because it is mandatory. So I will say spring dot data source, right? So data source dot URL, right? So here I will add jdbc colon mysql colon / I will say localhost is my machine, 3306 is port of my MySQL, right? And I will say spring CRUD, Okay, so spring CRUD. So this is my schema name, as we have created the new schema, right? Spring CRUD earlier. So this is my data source URL. Then I will say spring dot data source dot username. Alright, so add your username, then spring dot data source dot password, and add your password, right? So this will be my, you know, the data source configuration. So I will also add one more configuration, right? So spring dot jpa, jpa dot show sql, right? So what this property will do, this property will show all the sql statements that is going to be fired while, you know, adding or updating anything in the database, right? So this will print all the queries onto the console. Okay, now next is we need to add our JSP related configuration, right? So as we are showing the JSP here, right, so we need to tell the spring that where is this particular JSP is located, right? So for that we need to add the spring dot mvc dot view dot prefix, right? So prefix will be slash web inf, right? So I will say web inf slash JSPs, right? This is my folder path where all my JSPs are going to, you know, Spring will find all those JSPs here, right? And then spring dot mvc dot view dot suffix will be dot JSP, right? So why you need this configuration? So if you see carefully in our controller, I have written the string, right? So which is create user page. So what spring internally will do over here, it will take the prefix, right? So first it will do the prefix, it will attach this particular prefix and suffix to this string, right? And it will find the path. So it will be like slash web inf slash JSPs slash, then it will be create user page, and last is the suffix, right? So this is how your spring going to find it out where this particular page is, because you are just returning the string, right? And spring will do internally all this magic behind the background, right? So now our configuration is ready. Now there is one more thing that we need to do, and we need to add one dependency in our POM file. So to run your JSP pages, we need to go here and we need to add this particular dependency. So I will add here dependency, right? Dependency, and here I will add a group ID, group, I think, okay, don't ask your POM, and I think I need to cancel this group ID, right? And here we need to add org.apache.tomcat.embed. Okay, so this is the dependency that we need to add. Okay, I think I need to correct this dependency spelling. There's a typo, and group ID is there. Now add the artifact ID. So artifact ID, right? And here we need to add the, so we'll say tomcat happen embed happen jasper, right? And we also need to provide the scope over here. So scope, I think it's scope, yeah, scope, and let's say provided. Okay, so why we need this? Because you are executing the JSP inside the Tomcat, so Tomcat needs to know that JSP is going to use, and this additional dependency is required for that, right? So you can find it out more on this if you you know, if you wanted to know why exactly you need this. It's a kind of a bug in a spring most of the time, right? So they have added, we need to add this dependency explicitly all the time because of this error maybe, right? So our all the configuration is okay now, and now we will just check whether we able to, you know, get the JSP page or not. Okay, so let's just verify our configuration once. So here we have added username, password, JDBC, MySQL, Spring CRUD, the suffix and prefix, and we also added the our dependency. Okay, it looks everything okay. Now let's go ahead and let's try to run the application. So you can right click here and run as, you can either run as Spring Boot app or you can run as a Java application, both will be fine. Now if your application if your configuration is okay, everything is okay, this application will start, otherwise it will give us the error. Okay, so let's see if it works or not. So Spring is starting. Yeah, so here you can see our application is started. So if you are getting this message, so it means that your application, Spring application, is started properly. By default the port is of course the 8080. Okay, now let's go ahead and try to access our URL and let's see whether we able to get our JSP page or not. So let's try to access the application. So I will say http colon slash slash, I will say local host colon 8080 slash, I will say create user. This was the URL that we have provided, right? So let's go to our controller and this is the URL that we have, right? So create user. So now let's go ahead and execute this and let's see if it works or not. So it's running and yeah, so here you can see, so our JSP page, we are perfectly able to display our JSP page, right? So our application is now perfectly working fine now as per our setting. Now we will proceed ahead with the user creation part. So now we are able to access our create user page.jsc. So now we will proceed ahead with our form creation. So let's go here and I will add one form. So form, right, and I will say action will be something, right, and I will put method as I will say put it as a get as of now, right. Then we'll create our input, so input, and I will say type, input type is equal to text, and name is equal to the first that we are going to put it is id, right. So id, then next is I will just simply yeah, so we need to add the id, so id is equal to this, this will be my id. Then I will simply copy this and I will go here. Next is my login id, right, so I will say login id, which is of type text, and here I will say login id, right. So login id, then next is the name of the user, right, and I'll just simply say it's a name, right, and I will just add and the input tag correctly, right. So in our case id is basically read only, right, so I will just add a read only attribute, right. So by mistake it nobody enters the value inside it, right. And the last one is the status, right, so status is equal to there are two status as I mentioned earlier. So one is active, right, so active, and I will say input, right, and I will say type, input type is equal to radio, right, so it's a radio. I will pass this name as equal to status, right, and I will say value is equal to for this I will be putting it as active. Okay, so active, so this is one done, and then again we need to create the inactive one, right, so I will just simply add the inactive status, so I will say inactive, right, which is of again of type radio, and I will say inactive, right. And last is the button, right, so submit button, so I will say input and I will say type, right, so type is equal to submit, right, and I think that's it. And I will simply also add the value, right, so value will be I will say save. Okay, so save. So I think our form is ready. So here what I will do is So let me run the form, let me run the application again. So I will stop the application and I will run application again, and we will try to check whether we are able to get this or not, right? So our server is starting, right? So application is started. Let's go ahead and refresh, and here you can see, right? So our form is there, but it is not formatted, right? So for this, what we will be doing is we will simply add this everything in pre-tag, right? So pre-tag is basically help you to format your this form, right? We'll be going to say it. Okay, so this is our form is ready now. Okay, now we need to uh, create some action API, right? Create some API where on the click of save button we should be able to save that particular user, right? So let's proceed ahead. So now for action that we need to create is I will say save user, right? So currently if you see, there is no action defined in a controller for this, right? So we will go to the controller, right, and we will create one method. So I will say public which return again a string and I will say save user, right? And currently I'm not doing anything, so I will say return, I will say null as of now. Okay, now let's add our request mapping. So I will say at the rate request mapping, right? So request mapping, and I will say save user, right? So save user, we will require to add it over here. So what I will do over here is we need to return back the user, right? So so before proceeding ahead, what I will do is we need to save this particular user. First we need to get the user, right? So here if you go, we are submitting the entire form over here, right? So I will get this form in the form of a user first. Okay, so for this what you need to do, you need to get the user using model attribute. Okay, so model attribute, right, and you can pass the form as a user and you can take it this as a user, right? So user, it is there. Okay, so which is from com.crud.model.user, right? So it is, now we have taken our input. So now what we need to do is we need to save this user, right? So for this, if you see, we have the add method inside your service class, right? So first we need to auto wire our service IMPL, right? So I will go over here and I will say private user service, right? So user service, and I will say user service, right? And just auto wire it at the rate auto wire, right? So auto wire. So now we have a actual object of user service IMPL over here, and we will simply call the user service dot add method with the user, right? And if you see carefully over here, we are returning the saved user back, right? So we will simply extract this to local variable, right? And I will say again here saved user, right? So now as our user is saved, and we also get the instance of that particular user. So next is what I want is I also want to show some user friendly message, right? So I will create the message string message is equal to, I will say user saved with ID, right? User saved, I will say successfully, right? Successfully with ID, and I will print the ID over here, right? So get saved user, right, dot get ID, right? So user saved successfully with particular ID, and this message we need to pass it back. Okay, so we are passing this message back to where, to our same page, so create user.jsp, right? So I will simply return it to create user.jsp, right? And what we need to do is we also need to pass this message, right? So for that, what we need to do, we need to use the model map, right? So I will inject the model map, right? So model map, and okay, model map, I will say model map, right? And I will simply add this message to our model map, right? So I will say model map dot add attribute, right? And I will here say message, and here I will say simply pass the message. Okay, so our controller API is ready. Now what we need is, we just need to print this message, right? So what you can do is, what we need to do here is, we will go simply here and I will just print the message, maybe here. Okay, so what I will do, I will simply use my EL syntax. So EL syntax here, and I will say message, right? So message will get printed over here, right? And instead of method, instead of get, I will say post. Okay, so I will say post, right? So we have form ready, right? We are also printing a message, we have API ready, and now let's see if we able to create the user or not. So I will run the application again, and my application is starting up. So let's see. Yeah, okay, so application is started. Now let's go to the browser and refresh. So once you refresh this, so your forms get formatted because we added the pre tag right earlier, and as ID is read only, so you can't add any ID, right? So here we need to create the login ID. So I will say Harry @gmail.com, right? And here I will add the name, which is Harry, right? And I will mark it as active. And once I save this, we should be able to save the user. Okay, so and we should get the message back, right? So let's click on save, and yeah, so here you can see, so user saved successfully with ID 1, right? So it means that our saved logic, user saving logic, is working correctly. So now let's check the database. So I will go to the database and I will simply select, right? So if you see it, the Harry should be here, right? It's taking some time. Yeah, here you can see, so Harry is inserted into the database, right? So whatever the entry that we have created, it's working correctly, right? So this is how your uh, save method works. So what we did here so far, so we have created our JSP page where we have created one form, right? So form and action is of course the save user. In the form we have added all our required input fields, right? Like ID, login ID, name and status, right? And in controller we have written the new API, right, which will take the input from the form, right, and it will insert everything in the database and returns back the message with the user ID, right? So here if you see that our user, if you go to the user is basically the ID field of the user is basically auto generated, right? We mark it as auto generated earlier, right? So um, this ID will be generated automatically, right? So our this logic is working, right? So our add method is done. Now we will proceed ahead with the view logic. Okay, okay, so now we are able to save our user successfully in the database. So if you go to the application and if you see the console, you can see that the queries are getting printed on the console, right? So here whenever there is an insert happened, the query is gets printed. So this is what the query, right? So insert into user, the login ID, the name and status. So as your ID is basically auto increment field, so ID won't be necessary, it won't be necessary to add the ID, right? And why this query is basically printed, because if you remember, we have added one property in application.property file, right, which is spring.jpa.showSQL, which is true. That is why this query is getting printed. So we will be also going to see the other queries once we start with the other operations, right? So now let's proceed ahead and we will create a page that will show all the logged database details. Okay, so I will just close everything. Okay, so what I want is I want now to show all the users which are available in the database. Okay, so the first is we will start with the of course the controller first. Okay, and I will create one method. So I will say public, and I will say string, and I will say view all user. Okay, and here it is, of course, it is going to return the JSP page. So I will say return, and I will say view 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 all page. Okay, so view all page. Now let's add the mapping. So I will say at the rate request mapping, right? So request mapping, and I will simply pass view all. Okay, so view all is your URL, right? So I will say instead of view all I will say view users. Okay, and I will here say view users page, right? So this is our API is ready. Now what we need to do is we need to get the all the details first from the database, right? So for this we need to call our service method, right? So currently if you see in service there is no provision to get all the users, right? So first let's add the method over here which will return all the users from the database. So I will say list. Okay, so I am going to return the list of user from the database, and I will say find all. Okay, find all. This method doesn't take any input. Okay, so we will just call this method and it will return back all the list of users. Okay, and of course we need to write the implementation. So let's override and implement the method find all, right? And here we need to call our repository method, right? So if you just return here, I will say instead of return null I will say user repository dot, there is a find all method which is already there in JPA repository, right? So this is the advantage of JPA repository. You don't need to implement all the method by yourself, right? So JPA repository already provides you a lot of methods which are related to database operations, and it is very easy to use this. Okay, so we have our service implementation ready. Now let's go to the controller and just call the method. So I will say here user service dot find all, right? And I will simply extract this to local variable, right? And I will say here users. Okay, users, right? So my users are there now. Now again you need to pass all these users to the your page, view users page, right? So for this what I need to do, I need to add the model map. So I will say model map. So model map, right? And I will simply pass this as attribute. So add attribute, right? And I will simply not add attributes, right? So add attribute, and I will say users, and simply pass the users, right? So now we also have a users. Now we just need to route this to our view user page. Now view users page is not yet available, right? So let's create the new JSP page. So what I will do, I will just simply copy the same page, right? And I will just paste again. Okay, and we will modify this page, right? So I will say view users page. So I will say view users page, right? You can give any name over here. I am just keeping this name to make this tutorial as simple as possible. Okay, now we will update this. So this title should be view user, and I will say here also view users, right? So now we don't need this, right? So I will just remove this. I don't need message either, right? So we are going to show all the users in the table. Okay, so we will create a table, right? And here I will say th, the table header, right? And slash table header, right? It's not a table header. Basically we need to first create the tr, right? So I will say tr, and slash tr, and inside this we will add our header, right? So here four names that we need to add, right? So id, name, login id, and status, right? So I will say id, I will say login id, right? Then next is name, right? So name, and last is the status, right? So it is there. Now let's create the another. So I will say t body, right? So t body, and inside we have a tr, right? So tr, each tr contain the td, right? So table data, which it contains basically the your username, id, login id, and status, right? So I will add it over here, correct? So now what I want is I want to print all the users, and I will be using the JSTL syntax over here. Okay, so JSTL is basically servlet provided a syntax kind of a library where we can use the JSP syntax over here and iterate all the details, right? So for this, first thing that we need to do is we need to add the dependency, okay, in the pom.xml. So I will go here, I will just simply copy this, okay, and I will add it over here, and the group ID is java x dot servlet, right? And artifact ID is simple JSTL, right? We don't need a scope, okay? So you need to add this library if you want to work with the JSTL syntax, okay? So this is the first part. Now next, move to view users page, and we need to include the JSTL over here. So what we need to do over here is we need to add the our JSTL syntax. So we need to tell the JSP that we are using the tag link directory over here with certain prefix, right? So if you see here JSP colon attribute or JSP body, right, so it will be using something like this. So for this, what we need to do, we need to add the taglib attribute over here, right? So taglib directive, not attribute. So at the rate, and I will say taglib, right? So taglib, you need to pass your URI, right? So URI is equal to, so here http colon slash slash java dot sun.com, right? And slash JSP JSTL core, okay? And you need to add the prefix, what the prefix that you want. You can add any prefix over here, right? So C will be my prefix. So my tags will starts with C, okay? So C colon something, right? And we also need to add one more which is at percent at the rate page, right? So page, and we need to pass el ignored, that needs to be false, right? So el it should be el ignored, it's basically is el ignored, right? So is el ignored false, okay? This we need to add it. So our el gets ignored while manipulating that particular tag library, okay? So we are ready now with this. So let's go ahead, and we need to create the tr, right? So here we need to use our taglib directory, which is c colon for each, right? So for each, and what we need to tell for each, that we are going to use the items, right? So items is basically whatever the values that you passed in your model map, right? So in model map we have add the users, correct? So let's go ahead and use this users, right? And let's store this in a variable. So I will say variable, and I will say user, right? One more thing, I think it should not be in the double quotes, it should be in this el syntax, right? So this is the list that for each is going to iterate. So for each element it will store this variable, store the value in this reference variable, right? And I will just simply add this inside this for each, okay? So now the first thing that we need to show is the user ID, right? So I will simply add user dot ID, right? Then next is user dot login ID, right? Then dollar I think login ID I is capital, I guess, right? Then dollar it is user dot name, and last is dollar user, right, dot status, right? So let's save this, I hope it's correct. And okay, so now there it is. Everything is there. I think I need to, yeah. So our form is ready, our page is ready now. So let's see if everything is okay or not. So what we have did so far, so we have added one method in a user service interface, which is find all, which is returning your a list of users, right? We added the appropriate implementation and called the find all method from the user repository, right? Then we have created the new API in a controller that view all users, view users, where we are getting all the users from the database, right? And we are passing in a model map, and we're returning back to the view users page.jsp, right? On view users page we have added our tag lib, right, and ECL ignored. So your tag lib is coming from your Java x.servlet JSTL dependency, right? And we have created a table and we for each the list, right? So now let's try to run this application. So I will say run, and let's see. So application is running, and yeah, so application is started. Now let's go to the browser, okay, and instead of save user I will say view users, right? And I will enter. Let's see if it works. Yeah, so here you can see, so we call the view users and we got all the values on the table, right? So if you go to the console and you can see that select query is being fired, right? So select user ID, and this is the details that of the query, right? So here we are able to get all the users, right? So I will do 2-3 more things over here. So I will also add the button. Instead of button I will simply add a link, right? So I will say a anchor tag, right? So href is equal to what I will do is I want this there should be some link should be there to move from one page to another page. So I will simply calling the create user from view users here, right? And I will save it out, and I will again go to the create user page, and I will add this again anchor tag to view all the users. So I will just copy this and will pass it I will pass it over here, and I will just remove this. So I will go here back and I will call the view users, right? So I will go here. Let's stop the application, let's run it again, and application is starting. So application is started. Let's go here and again refresh the view users, and we should get the button to create the user, right? Okay, there is some issue with here. Let's see. Okay, I think we forgot to add the view all, right? So we are viewing the user, right? So I will say view all, right? So it is not there, and on the view users it should be create user, right? So I will say create user, right? And let's stop the application again and start the application again. Let's see. So our application is started. Let's go back and refresh the page, and yeah, so create user is there. So if you click on the create user, it will go to the create user API, right? Create user page, and if you click on the view all, right, so it will go back to view all. Okay, so now we are able to route it back to both the URL, and if you click you can see the select query is being fired. So our view users is ready. Right now we will proceed ahead with the next operation, which is the edit and update operation. So now let's move ahead with the edit functionality. So here we are able to now view the user, right? So our next step is we will add a edit functionality for this particular user, right? So the first thing that we need to do here is we will add the edit link over here, right? And once we clicked on that particular edit button, we should get all the details of that particular user along with all the details, and we should be able to provide the update button, right? So this is what we need to achieve now. So let's go ahead and add the edit link over here. So the first thing, let me stop this. So I will stop, and first thing that we need to do is we need to add here a button, right? So what I will do, I will add td, right, /td, and I will simply add one anchor tag, right, and I will say edit, right, and here I will say href is equal to I will say edit user, right? So edit user is something that we need to create in our controller, right? And we also need to tell this API that which user he wants to edit, right? So what we'll do, I will say a question mark id, right, and is equal to I will say in yield syntax, right, I will say user dot id. So we are now here passing the user id as a parameter, right? So this is passing user id as a parameter. So now let's go ahead to the controller, and let's create this edit user, right? So I will go here and I will say public string edit user, right, and it's return string, right? So return a JSP page. So I will simply first add the null as of now, and I will add my request mapping. So request mapping, right, request mapping is edit user, right? So edit user, right? Now here as you see we have added the id as a parameter, right? So we will take a parameter over here. So for this, what we need to do, we need to add the request param annotation. Okay, so request param. So request param, I think it's a request param annotation, right? And here we need to pass the id, right? So we are passing the parameter as name as a id, right? So I taken the id over here, and I will say it's an integer and it's a id. Okay, so we will store the incoming id in this id variable, right? Now next is what we need to do is we need to fetch the details of this particular user, right, from the database, right? And if we go to our service, currently we do not have any other way to get the user, right? So we need to write one method which will provide me the all the details of selected particular user, right? So let's go ahead and create this. So I will say user, and I will say find by id, and I will say integer id. Okay, so I will pass the integer, the id, right, and it should able to find that particular user. So let's add the implementation. So here I will implement the method find by id, right? And now here what we need to do is we just need to call the appropriate method from the user repository. So I will here go and I will say user repository dot. So here there is a method find by id, right, which is already there inside the CRUD repository, so you don't need to do anything. However, this find by id returns the optional type of user. Okay, so what you need to do is you need to extract this, right? So let's go and I will say extract, right? Okay, it is not extracting, so I think you can directly call a get. Okay, so here you can extract it to optional user, right? So this is just to save your null pointer and all those other exceptions, right? So this method from the CRUD repository find by id returns the optional type of user, right? And here you can check whether particular id is empty or not using this optional dot empty method, right? And if it is there, you can if it is empty, you can pass the empty object and pass some kind of message, right? So and you can add your business logic according to this, and then you will return it back to your actual user page, right? So this is the usage of your service layer, right? So you can do lot of validation related stuff. Okay, so now our method is ready. So let's go ahead and get the users, call the user service. So user service dot find by id, right? And I pass the id over here, and I will just store this particular id, right? So I will say user instead of find by id, right? Now the next thing that we need to do is we need to pass this user information to our page, right? So what we need to do is we need to create the another page, right? So I will say edit user page, right? Edit user page. This page we need to create over here, right? And of course we need to pass this user in model map. So I will add the model map. So model map, right? And I will simply pass this user inside the model map, add attribute, right? So add attribute, and I will here say user, and I simply pass the user, right? Now the next thing is we are ready with the controller and service. Now next is we need to create this page, right? So edit user page. So what I will do, I will just simply copy my create user page because it will be required, and I will simply say here edit, right? So edit user page, right? So edit user page, and now what we required is, so let's go here first and we will just change the few things. So first is edit user, right? And I will say update user, okay, here. And what action should be, so action will be in this case is update user. So if user clicks on update, right, so we need to update that particular user, right? So first we need to get the information, right? So we have id, and which is read only. Here what we need to do is we just need to pass or set the value, right? So value is equal to I will say dollar user dot id, right? So user dot id, then next is login id, right? So I will go value is equal to dollar user dot login id, right? So login id, then we are just setting the values, right? So we are getting all these values from user, right? This object which we got, and we are just setting all the data, right? So value is equal to, right, user dot name. Oops, I think I forgot the brace. So yeah, it is there. And last is the radio button, right? So we need to set this over here. So I will just go over here, and yeah, I will go over here. Value is equal to, here we need to add a little condition over here, right? So user dot status, right? If it is equal to active, right? Because this is the value we are storing in database, right? If it is equal to active, then we need to check this radio button, right? So I will say checked, right? Else don't do anything, right? So this is what we need to do, right? So I will copy the same over here, and I will just mark this particular user as inactive over here, right? And here I will say inactive, right? So inactive, because this is the value. So what it will do, it will just check if user's status is active, then it will check the active radio button. If it is inactive, it will do the check with inactive button, right? And here I will just update this to update, right? So we are updating it, and the first thing that we need to do is let's see if it's working or not, okay? And then we will check the update, okay? So I hope it is ready. Let's see. So let's start the server. So I will say Spring CRUD Application, server is starting. So our application is started. Let's go and just refresh the view user. So we should get the view user over here, right? So view user is now updated and we have an edit button, right? And here if you see at the bottom, you can see if whenever I hover an edit button, you can see that there is a link is appearing. So if I click, the request will go with the edit user with ID 1, right? And it should be able to show the all the details from the database, right? So I will just click on edit button. Let's see. And yeah, here you can see. So we are getting the all the data from the database, right? So only thing is the active or inactive still not worked. So let's see what is the issue. So what we need to do here is I mistakenly add the value and double quotes. I need to remove this because we already set the value over here, and we just need to set whether it's a checked or not, right? So I will just remove this and we will restart the application again. So I will stop the application, I will go and I will run the application again. So our application is started. I will go to the view wall again, right? And I will click the edit button. Okay, so now it's working. So we got all the details from the database. You can even check this from your console. If you go to the console, you can see the select is being fired, right? So select is little bit of different this time because see it's find by ID. So ID is in the where clause, right? So we are ready with the update now. Now let's proceed ahead and add the edit related operation from the controller and in the service. So I will go I will just close the sum of which are not required. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to create the update user, right? So I will go here and I will write the code. So I will say public, and so what I will do is I will simply just copy the save user, okay, because it's a similar one, only we need to change it few things over here, right? So the first thing that we need to do is we need to update the mapping to update user. So request mapping is of course update user, right? And yes, we are getting the user as an input, right? And we will be editing this particular user. So the service currently don't have the any update operation, right? So let's add the method. So I will go here, I will say user and I will say update and I will just pass the user again, okay, and we will save it. Now let's add the implementation. So I will go here and I will override the method which is update here, right? And here what we need to do is we just need to call the appropriate method. So user repository has one method which is save again. So you can save the user which is same as your add, right? And it will again of course return the updated user. So I will just extract this to local variable and I will say update user, right? So updated user. So this save method will detects automatically whether this user is already there or not. If it is there, it will update that user, otherwise it will insert that user, okay? Important thing is that whenever this particular method executed, we should be able to see the update query instead of the insert one. That anyway we will going to check it out, right? Now this update method is there. Now let's go ahead to the controller and simply update, okay, and here I will just do a little changes. So I will say updated user, right? And I will just pass update the message. So user updated successfully, right? User updated successfully. I don't need, yeah, I will keep this as it is, okay, and I will pass this message, and we wanted to go back to the same page again. So I will just revert it back to same user, right? So edit user page, and if you go to the edit user page, we already added a message code over there, right? So message it will be displayed, okay. So now I think everything is okay, and let's proceed ahead and check whether this is working or not. So I will just run the application again. So our application is up and running. So let's go ahead and I will go to the view wall again, and what I will do is I will edit this user Harry, and I will add some initiative Harry M, and I will mark this Harry as inactive. So these are the two changes that I am going to do over here. Okay, so let's click on update, and yeah, we got a message, user updated successfully with ID 1, which is Harry. Let's go to the view wall and check whether these details are reflected or not. So if I click on a view wall, yeah, here you can see the user's details are updated into the database, right? So let's go to the database and check whether it's reflected or not. I will fire the select again, and yeah, so it is there. And if you go to your console, you can see the update query is being fired, right? So this, it fires the update query internally, right? So this is our update user operation, right? So now next is we will proceed ahead with the delete operation, which is almost very same as the update one. So now let's proceed ahead with the delete operation. So what we will be doing over here is we will be adding the delete link in front of this edit button. So in the same column we will add the delete link, and we will pass the ID to the another API, which is delete user, and which will delete that particular user from the database. Okay, so let's go ahead, and I will go to the view users page, right? And here I will just simply copy this, copy and paste, and here I will say delete. Okay, delete, and here I will say delete instead of edit, right? So delete user with particular ID. Okay, now let's I will just stop the application, and I will go to the controller, right? And controller I will simply copy the update one. Okay, I will copy the same. I will do some little modifications over here, right? So the first thing is we need to update the request mapping, which is delete user, right? We will update the method to delete user, right? Now here we won't be able, we are not getting basically the actual user, right? So we'll be getting the parameter, right? So I will just simply copy this one, right? And I'm not going to show any message as of now. Okay, so I won't be showing any message as of now. Okay, so I will just simply delete the user, and will directly we will redirect to your view all user page, right? So I have a delete method over here. Now what we need to do is we just need to delete, we need to call the delete method, right? So currently we do not have any delete method in the service, so let's go to the service first and add the delete. So I will say void delete, right? And here I will just say integer ID. So I will be passing the ID only, and I will be deleting the user. Okay, let's go to the service IMPL and alt shift S, and I will say override implement, right? And here we will write our logic, right? So first what I will do, I will first get the user and then delete it. Okay, so I will say user repository dot find by ID. It's good to find that particular user if it is there or not, right? So and let's extract this. So yeah, so we have an optional user, right? So user, right? And we will check whether this particular user is exist or not, right? So I will go over here and I will say if. So what we need to do is I will say add if user dot is present. Okay, so if it is present, if it is true, then we will be going to delete this user, right? So what I will do is I will simply call the user repository dot delete, and I will say user dot get, because user is present over here, right? So we'll be checking over here whether user is present or not, and if it is there, then we will be going to delete it, right? So let's go ahead and call this method in your controller. So I will go over here, I don't require this, right? So I will simply say delete, and I will simply say ID. Okay, so I'm not going to show any message as of now, so I will remove this, and what I will do, I will redirect back to view all page. Okay, so I will say view users page, and I will simply go back over there, right? So this is the delete functionality. Now let's see. So what we have did so far is we have added the delete user over here, right? So the link we have added with a parameter user ID, and then we added the controller API over here, right? And we simply added the delete method and we checked whether that particular user is there or not, and if it is there then we will delete it. Okay, so let's run the application. Yeah, so our application is started. Now let's go to the view users again. So I will refresh this, and here you can see there is a delete button. Okay, so what I will do, I will add few more records here so that we will know whether that particular user is deleted or not. Okay, so let me add few more entries over here. So here I added few additional users so that we can find it out, and if you go to the database, you can also see there are multiple users added, right? So now let's go and try to delete one user. So I will delete the Harry. Okay, so let's click on delete and see whether it's working or not. So yeah, so it's deleted, and it's go back and there is some issue. Let's see what is it. Okay, so I think we have forgot to add find by all. So what we will do, so user is anyway deleted, so if you go here and you will check the console, you can find it out the delete query is being fired. However, we uh, not added the list because we are routing it to your view users page, right? And to route it to view user page, first you need to find all the details, right? So which we have missed. So let me stop it, right? So I stop the application, and after delete I will just simply add this, right? And I again need to add the model map over here so I can pass the user list, right? So I will go over here and I will save. Okay, so it's ready. Let's run the application again. Okay, so application is up and running, so let's go and we will go to uh, create user again, and we will go to the view all. Okay, so view all, so one user is deleted. Now let's try to delete the Jenny from the database. Now I click on delete, right? And yeah, so Jenny is deleted, right? So if you go to the database and if you run the select query again, you can see, so record with Jenny will be no longer available in a database, right? So this is how the your delete operation works, right? Now we are almost done with all the functionalities, which CRUD functionalities, right? Now it's time to update our application with the little bit of a bootstrap. Okay, so let's proceed ahead and we will update our application with the bootstrap and CSS libraries. So now we are already done with all the pages of the application, and we will proceed ahead with the bootstrap now. Okay, so before we proceed ahead, I just want you to know that bootstrap is additional section that which I am going to cover here right now, and this is completely optional section. So first what we will do, we will just have a quick introduction to the bootstrap, and then we will quickly design our one page with the bootstrap. Okay, so let's see what is a bootstrap first. So what I will do, I will just go and search the bootstrap. So bootstrap, I will say bootstrap 4. Okay, and here if you go to this first link, getbootstrap.com, right? So let's go here and see. So bootstrap is basically an framework to build the responsive UI application. So whatever the UI that you are going to create, you can, that particular UI will work on a desktop as well as the mobile browsers, right? So this is the most important part of the bootstrap, because this is the advantage we can say, because whatever the UI that you are going to create, it's also very easy to render on all type of devices. That kind of UI you can create, and bootstrap provide lot of CSS classes and JS classes, which also your UI looks far more better than what currently we are looking at, right? So this is a bootstrap, and for this tutorial I am going to use the bootstrap version 4.1.1. okay, so I'll just quickly go and search for 4.1.1 CDN. okay, so CDN is basically a content delivery network. okay, so if you go to the CDN of a bootstrap, so this is the link, usebootstrap.com, right? So you can copy the required CSS URL from here, and you can simply just include this CSS into your project. Okay, and later you can start using the classes from this particular version, Bootstrap version. Okay, so now here what I will do first, I will just uh, take the backup of my current JSP, right, and I will uh, create a new copy this JSP first, so that I have a backup for this. So I will just paste it, and I will here say without Bootstrap. Okay, without Bootstrap, uh, Bootstrap, right? So I have JSPs without Bootstrap now, and I will now edit my these JSPs, existing JSPs. Okay, so we will convert everything to Bootstrap now. So first is, let's just include the Bootstrap. So what I will do, I will just simply copy this, right? So I will say copy, and I will paste in my head section, right? So I will just add it over here, right? And we are using Bootstrap 4.1.1, so I will just simply copy the 4.1.1 URL over here, right? And I will simply copy the href location over here. Okay, so I will just go here, and I will select this. This is the 4.0.0 library, so I don't want it, and just simply copy this. So this is done. So the page that we are currently going to change is the view user, right? So where we are viewing all the user rights. So we have now included the library. Now how you know what kind of classes that you need to use, right? At bootstrap.com, in introduction section, you can see here there is a lot of details available, right? So what is the folder structure, what are the kind of classes that were available over here, where is the source code and JavaScript, how you can perform theming and all those things, right? So it is already there. Now here if you go to the layout, so layout will explain you what kind of layout that you should use. So mostly we'll be using the container and row section over there, right? And if you go to the content section, is the most important thing, where you can find it out a lot of examples. So for example, if I go to typography, right, here you can see how to use h1 tags, and how it looks, right? So you can find it out good examples over here, right? So we will be using this Bootstrap page very frequently for this tutorial. Okay, so I request all of you, if you wanted to work with a Bootstrap, if you are interested to work with a Bootstrap, then you go with this page and find out what kind of examples are, what kind of classes are there which you can apply it to your HTML tags, right? So anyway, we will be going to cover this, so let's proceed ahead first. So I will go here, and first is what I will do is, so first we will just, if you see now we have added the Bootstrap, right? So now if you just simply run this application, so your page looks a little bit different now. Okay, so let's start the project. So my project is started, so now let's go and refresh the view user, and there should be some change, it should be there. Okay, so now here you can see, so our application is a little bit, the page UI is little bit changed, right? So now the CSS libraries now started changing your HTML tags, and all the UI right now you are looking at is as per the Bootstrap 4.1.1. okay, so now let's start changing this. So the first thing is, what I want is, I want to make this Spring CRUD application this label at the center of the table. Okay, so center of the page basically. So I will just go here, and what I will do is, there is a class which is we need to apply, so I will say class. Okay, and I will say text hyphen center, right? So if you go here, and if you go to the typography, you can find probably it is here, right? So text hyphen center, right? So this is the class which is used for the alignment purpose. And if you just refresh this, I think we need to restart our application every time we do these changes. Okay, so I will just do this first time because the JSP it won't reflect directly, because we have embedded Tomcat. There is another way to do this, where you can reflect the JSP on demand. Okay, but currently I am just restarting the application. Okay, now if you just refresh, and you can see, so your the label is in the middle round, right, so in the center of the page, right. So now let's go ahead and start adding the more and more changes. So we'll go back here and I will stop the application. Okay, so what I will do, I will just add one br, so that it will be, there is some line break over there. Now everything is in Bootstrap is with the container. Okay, so there is a div tag. I hope you guys are already aware about the div tag. So div and everything is a container, okay, in a Bootstrap. So we need to add the class. Okay, so class is equal to container, right. So container is there. Now next, so what I want is, first is I want this title, right, so it is there, and I will just simply add one line break over there, so that I can give there should be some line spacing between both the table and this view user. Okay, um, there are also multiple ways, but I am currently keeping this as simple as possible, because we are not going to look thorough into the Bootstrap section. But just to go ahead with the Bootstrap, for beginning section, it's the simple classes that we are going to use, right. Then next is we need to add one row. Okay, so row, we need to create one div tag, right, and here I will say class is equal to row. So row is basically it will add another section in below your view user. Okay, so this is a kind of section, and where we will be adding our entire table content. Okay, so I will just copy the tables and paste it inside your row, right. So I will go here, I will just format it. Okay, so we have added our table inside the row now. So now if you go to the Bootstrap content here, and if you select the table, you can use tables, whatever the table design that you want. Okay, so there are multiple table designs are available. So table dark is there, right. So if you want table like this, if you want table like this, so it is already there, right. And what I will do is I will select the hoverable table, right. I will go here, okay, it is not there, and yeah, so this table what I want. Okay, so for this, how you can convert your table to this table, so you just need to add the class like this, right. So I will go here and I will say table, and class is equal to table, right, and table hyphen hover, right. So table hover, right. So this is there, and next is what I will do is I will also add a t head. So t head, right. So I will going to add the header section, and I will put all this header inside the t head. Okay, and I will add some class to this, so that it looks a little bit better. Okay, so we have a table head and table body, and here I will say class is equal to your table hyphen dark, right. So what it will do, so if you go here, your table header looks like this. Okay, this header, like so it will be only a dark, and rest of the table is hoverable table. Okay, okay, so it is done, and let's see what else is remaining. And if we go over here, yeah, there is a link is available over here, right. So I will just update this link. I want this link to be look like a button, right. So let's convert this link to specific button. So if you go to the Bootstrap again, and let's go to the component, and here there is a button, right. So if you go here, you can find a lot of buttons available over here, right. So what I want is I want my button to be look like this, my link is look like this. So you can convert link or button, both whatever you want, right. So there are a lot of things. So like this, if I want this button your link like this, so you can also provide the btn class. So let's add this. So I will simply just copy this, okay, and I will simply add it here. Okay, and I will just save it. Okay, so now our this class is ready. Now let's run the application again, and let's see if it is looking as per our expectation or not. So our application is started. So let's go here, let's refresh the view user, and yeah, here you can see, so our CSS libraries are getting reflected. Okay, so here there is still something missing, so I will add to empty TD over here, and I think we need to get this button inside the div. Okay, so let me change this. So let's go, and simply I will stop the application again, and I will simply add th, right? So I will say th, and yeah, like this, and simply copy it again, and I will just simply take this button inside the div. Okay, so it will be after the table. Now let's run your application again. So our application is started, and let's refresh the page again, and yeah, so here you can see, so this is how the Bootstrap work, right? So this is the link that we have created, view user. These are the link. You can also convert this to your buttons as well, and this is how your Bootstrap will convert your entire UI like this. So UI looks pretty much dashing, and it looks very good. Okay, now if you click on create user, this is our older UI because we not yet added the your Bootstrap changes over here. So let's quickly add it, and then we will check whether it's working or not. So first let me stop the application. Okay, and I will go to create user. Okay, and first thing we need to add is our link to Bootstrap. So I will just simply copy this, and I will go over here and simply add. Okay, now the first thing that we need to add is our this one, the Spring CRUD application. It should be in the center. Okay, so I will just simply copy this and update it. Okay, so it is there now. Next is again we need to add the container, right, and the row. Okay, so I will just simply copy, and I will paste it over here, right. I will just close the div, both the div. Okay, so I will say create instead of view, right, and we don't require the pre tag and all this now, right. So I will just remove the pre tag from here. I'll just remove the pre tag from here as well, and yeah, rest I think we can take inside the row tag. So I'll just control X and cut this and paste it over here. Okay, so now let's update this as well. Let's see. Okay, so it is there. This is the message, right? And yeah, so yeah, so it is there. Now let's update our form. So here first what we'll do, everything is a div inside this, right. So I will say I will create one div tag. Okay, and I will add id over there. So for this what we need to do is create a class. Okay, and so there is a class in a Bootstrap which will um, provide you how you can use the form group. So if you go to the Bootstrap again, and if you go to the forms, right, so you can find it out here like this. So if you want to form like this, right, so you can use this divs, right, like this, and there are multiple examples available over here, right. So form divs and all those things, right. So I request you to go through these forms and create forms whatever you want. Okay, so what I will do, I will just simply use this kind of form. Okay, so I will just simply copy this class. Okay, so I will go here, and I'll just simply copy this. Okay, so this is the form group. This is kind of one row, right. So like this one row, okay, where we have email and the input email, right. So the first thing is the label. Okay, so I will simply add the label. So if you just simply copy this entire thing, it will also work. So let me copy this over here, and let me put it right. And here what I will do is, I don't require this, right. So I'll just remove this. I just keeping it, taking or copying all this because I don't want to do much of the code, because it's just an optional section, and I will just simply call this. Okay, so I will just use this, and I will just simply use the classes from here. So the class is control plain text. Okay, and I will simply add it over here, right. I don't need this, right, so I will remove this, right. So our one part is done. So now let's proceed ahead. So I will simply copy this again, right, and I will add the login ID, right. So I will say login ID over here. So I will say login ID. I will add it over here, and I will add my input, which is a login ID, right? And I will simply add the class, right? So I will simply say the class, which is the form control plain text, right? And I will just remove this over here, and then next again let's copy this and add it over here. So I have added all the three fields. Now the last is the status one, so it requires a little bit of additional things to be done from UI point of view. So I'll just simply add it from the bootstrap.com, and you can just check, and you can add those changes in your project. So here you can see I have updated the the radio buttons over here, right? So your I have added the field set, which is of class of form group, because this is the kind of a set. Then we have created one row. I have added the separate legend for the status, and then I have created one form check. I have added a label and the form check, and again label for the inactive. Okay, so you can just create the your UI, update your UI like this. So this is the way how we can do it. So I simply copy pasted this from the bootstrap.com. Okay, so you can just do the same just for now, and then you can understand how it works. Okay, now the next is, again, last is our button, right? So for button, what I will do, I will just merge all these two buttons inside this. Okay, so if you see over here, I will just simply copy paste it, and you can add it over here, right? So I will just add it over here, and you can see, so submit button, which is here, right? I have used the similar button which I created earlier, right? And I will just remove this and view all, right? So link, I also converted to the primary. Okay, now the last is the message one. Okay, so there is a separate message box is provided in a the bootstrap, so we will use that one. So if you go to the bootstrap, and if you go to the component section, there is a alert section is separately mentioned over there, where you can provide your alert messages like this. Okay, so what I want is, I want my alert message to be like this, right? So this is a success alert, right? So if you go here, you can simply copy the success alert over here, right? So I will just simply copy this success alert, and I will go over here, and I will add this message inside this success alert. Okay, so it will look like this. Okay, so I will just simply add this. Okay, so here okay, so this is there. So let's remove this. I don't require this. Success alert is sufficient. So what I will do is, I will just move this message from here to, I will just simply move this message to here. Okay, above the button. Okay, you can place it any over at any place, whatever you want. Okay, so now I think our form is ready. Now let's run the application, and let's check if it's working or not. So our application is started, so let's go ahead and refresh the create user, and let's see if it's working or not. So yeah, here you can see, so everything is there, right? And you can see, so this is the success alert. We need to change this a little bit, because this message is still appearing, right? So there is no message, but still that alert is appearing, so we need to add some if condition over there, which we will be going to add. And here I think there is some you can also see. So let's go ahead, and first we will just move this message. So we'll go here, and what I want is I will go here, right? So there is a if statement that we need to add. So to use the JSTL, we read a JSTL over here, right? So I will just simply go ahead and copy this two statement from here, and I will just simply go ahead and add it over here, because we are going to use the C colon if statement over here. Okay, so I will just go here, and I will say C colon if, not test, sorry, test, right? So here we will just add if dollar message is not equal to null, right? Then and only then execute this, which is this. Okay, so I will just simply add it over here, and I will just format this a little bit. Okay, so what this will do, if message is not null, then and only then it will show this alert message, otherwise it won't show the alert message. Okay, So here if you see, we are getting this alert box even if there is no message, right? So this will be get ignored, right? And one more thing I will do here is, if you see this carefully, this is not the input box is not showing it correctly. So I will just simply go here and I will just simply change the class. So I will just do this form control instead of form control plain text, right? So I'll just remove this, I just save it out, and okay, let's see is there any changes or not. Yeah, so it is almost there. And we also need to take this entire form at the middle of the this page, right? So what I will do is I will simply go here and I will add one more div with this particular uh, class. So class md8 and offset 2. Okay, so you can just find it out. This is the exercise for you, so you can just find it out what this exactly do. Okay, it's very simple. It will just keep entire the content inside this this div will be aligned to the center, right? So we'll just first add this, so it will go to the center one, right? And next is I just need to copy this entire row, right? So I will go over here, I will just cut this and just remove over here, and I'll just paste it over here, right? So it is yeah, okay. So now our JSP and HTML is completely ready. So now let's stop the application and run the application again. So our application is started now. Let's go ahead and refresh the create user page, and if I go ahead over here, so you can see, so it looks better now, right? So if you go to the view all, it will still work and it will show this, and if you click on the create user, you can see this. So you can make your form far more better, right? So you can also see the success alert is gone, and if you add any new users, so I will just go and try to add. So Tom, Adam and William are there, so I will go again here and will add Harry. Okay, so I will say Harry, I will say inactive, and I will say save, right? So you can see, so alert message is there now, right? So if you go back to view all, Harry is added, and if you go back to create user, the message is gone. Because so this is how you can update the UI, right? You can even update the UI far more better way. I just showed you how you can update this UI, right? So you can update the UI of your edit user page same like this, and even you can add far more other modification, and so you can add those changes from the Bootstrap. So this is with respect to the Bootstrap, which is an additional section which I cover in this video. So the rest of the thing you can explore Bootstrap more and start using the Bootstrap into your sample project or your day-to-day project activities. Okay, so I hope you understood the Bootstrap. Now let's move to the last section of this video. So now we have reached to the last section of this tutorial. So I hope you understand how to create the CRUD application. So if you are watching this, it means you have completed the entire tutorial, and I hope you understand how to create the CRUD application with Spring Boot, MySQL, JSP, and the of course with the Bootstrap. So I also uploaded this entire source code into my GitHub repository, and you can find the URL in the description section below. If you have any questions, suggestion and feedback, please add all those in the comment section below, and I hope you thoroughly enjoy this video. And if you think this information is valuable for others, please do like and share this video, and I will see you on the next one. Thank you.